get everybody to take their seats, that would be wonderful. And we can go ahead and call this Town Council Workshop meeting to order Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
Second.
First and second, all those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. That would be 6-0. Moving on to the workshop discussion, beach renourishment funding, project funding. Our Finance Director, Adriana Burnett. So Ms. Burnett, we'll turn it over to you unless Mark or anybody else has some other comments to begin with.
Thank you. Good morning, members of council, and good morning, community member, and everybody that is listening online. I actually have two very important guests this morning that I would love to introduce. We have Mr. David Shitwood and Andy Smith. They actually are from First Tryon, and they are our new financial advisors for the town.
Okay.
And I would like for David, if you don't mind, for 2 minutes, talk about First Tryon and some of the experience that you have as it relates to this process.
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. And good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for inviting us here this morning. I'm David Cheatwood and my colleague Andy Smith at First Tryon Advisors. We are a full-service financial advisory firm. So we're not a bank or a lender or an underwriter. We're purely a financial advisor, which means we sit on your side of the table and help you think through all the different options and decisions you have. We do a lot of long-term financial planning, and then if you have a financing to do, we take you through that financing process. Our main office is in Charlotte, which is where I'm located, and then Andy's in Columbia. And we work with your peers across the state. We work with local governments, cities, counties, utility systems, also colleges, universities, private schools, charter schools, hospitals, et cetera. I work primarily, and Andy does as well, with the local governments in North and South Carolina, a little bit in Georgia as well. But we're helping them again through this long-term financial planning and through the financing process. We work with, I think, 16 or 17 of the top 20 in South Carolina in terms of population for cities. And so we work with all of your peers across the state. We work with a lot of coastal communities as well that have unique issues that they're dealing with. And so we've got a lot of experience there working with your peers that we bring to the table when we're talking through different ideas and looking at your different projects that you have to fund. So that's a little bit about us. Happy to answer any questions you have, though, about our firm.
I'm sure we'll have some questions, but any questions right now? Great, thank you. Glad y'all are here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So let's start talking about the beach renourishment project. I know this is not the first workshop that we have. This is a continuation of the workshop that we started probably a few months ago. And there's a few questions still that I wanted to answer that are still pending. One of the things that I want to start by saying in this presentation does not have an exact numbers. What that means is there are assumptions. First assumption is we don't know how much this project is going to cost. So we are making right now the assumption that it's going to be 47.5. Other assumptions that we're making is as it relates to interest rates. As you know, our economy right now, our market, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 7 years. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of this year. So we're making a lot of assumptions as it relates to the interest payments and the interest that we are calculating in this presentation. We're also making assumptions as it relates to estimating revenues. We just went through the 2x2s with council talking about estimated revenues. Again, this is our best assumption based on our historical trends. So I just wanted to put that out there because this is the best information we have at this point in time. So if we start with the first slide is in relation to existing debt. So we talked a few months ago about having two bonds or two payments that are callable bonds. What that means is that we have the option, and that option is going to happen on August 1st, to potentially call those bonds and redeem them. Actually, go ahead and pay them off and just move them out of the way. The amount that we have is about $7.5 million of outstanding debt. And right now, the interest that we have is about 5%. So we also have something, and we're trying to compare this special obligation bond that we have against if we were to utilize $7.5 million and we were to invest that money in our South Carolina local government investment pool. And by the way, this is the investment tool that we have with the state of South Carolina. We have the option of investing money, and we do. We use them a lot. We invest our money there, and normally we get a very good return. If we compare that against sometimes what banks are charging, sometimes the South Carolina, we call it LGIP. Sometimes we get a better return on the investment if we deposit, if we use them to invest our money. In this particular example, we're utilizing 4.56%. So if we were to utilize the same money, the 7.5, we decide that we don't want to go ahead and pay that. We want to go ahead and leave the money in LGIP. Then the return on investment, again, we're utilizing an estimated number. We are thinking that everything is going to remain constant for the next 7 years. So that's the rate that we're going to potentially be getting on the investment of $7.5 million. When you compare those two rates, then we understand that it's more cost effective to pay off the bond with cash now rather than later. However, I just want you to make aware that it's very close. So it's not that we're talking about a big gap between the two. It's very close. So the decision here is more about how comfortable do you feel about paying $7.5 million in cash now? Or do you leave the money and we invest the money, considering that there's not a big gap between the two? I know in the past I heard from some of you saying that if you want to do something new, you want to start fresh, then it might be better for you to get that out of the way so you don't have any special bonds out there outstanding. So that is an option and a decision that needs to be made. For your information, one thing that I want to make you aware, and in our budget proposal that we're going to be presenting to you in May, we do have the callable bonds right now as something that we're going to go ahead and pay off and get out of the way. However, based on the decision that you make today, then we can either update that number in our budget that is going to be presented in May, or we can just go ahead and leave it as is. So one thing that I do want to mention too, my goal today, and this is something that I wanted to start saying in the presentation, my goal today is to get guidance from you as it relates to this beach renourishment. And guidance in terms of the decisions that are made as it relates to beach renourishment, how we're going to pay for this affects our budgets for fiscal year 26. So either you talk about paying everything in cash, 100%. I have several options that I want to present to you today. We have the 70-30, where we pay 70% in cash and we finance 30. We have 60-40, where we pay 60% in cash and then we finance 40. And then we have the 50-50 option, where we actually pay 50 and finance 50. Questions so far? Comments? Mark, you wanted to say something?
All I want to say is, well, thank you, Adriana. I just want to say, yeah, that is one of the several questions we will ask today about paying off the callable or not paying off the callable. I appreciate that Adriana said it's close, right? But let's hold off that answer until we get through the presentation. Circle back, we'll come back to you and ask you those questions.
Thank you. The next slide is cash versus debt funding. So again, we are making assumptions here on the rate. So we're saying our proposed special obligation bond, if we were to issue a new one, we're saying that our rate is going to be about 3.35%. And again, we're making the assumption that it's going to be a 7-year bond. And the 7-year came from, as we're thinking about beach renourishment, when is the next beach renourishment project going to take place? The beach renourishment bond that we had in 2017, we assumed that it was going to be a 10-year plan. But now we realize that we need to do that beach renourishment project sooner rather than later. So we're making the assumption that it will take about 7 years by the time we have to do our next beach renourishment project. That's where the 7 year came about. So again, if we're thinking about LGIP, again, investing that money at a 4.56% rate, then the question is, the investment rate is greater in interest rate on bonds, and it's more cost effective to borrow for projects. So let me go into the scenario so I can explain this better. One thing before I get there, one thing that I added to this, and I have some challenges as it relates to presenting this slide, but I'm presenting it to you just to give you a very high level overview of if we were to invest $47.5 million, assuming that our interest rates stay constant, which know that interest rates are not going to stay constant, but we're making the assumption that they're going to stay constant. So in 7 years, if we invest 47 millions and a half, then the return on investment can potentially be $17.4 million. This is assuming that we invest this money. Now, these are the scenarios. There's something that I do want you to be aware of this. This is something that both David and Andy helped us put together. But one thing that is missing in this presentation here is that we do not have fiscal year 26 estimated revenues in these numbers. So the balance that you see at the end, where it says resulting fund balance, that $12 million, 321,656 that you see in the first scenario does not include fiscal year 26 estimated revenues. The fiscal year 25 numbers do include the estimated revenues, do include expenditures that we're planning to assume for the remaining of fiscal year 25. So I just wanted to make sure to be aware when you're thinking about making decisions and utilizing these ending balances. I have another slide later on that shows the balance, the ending balances of fiscal year 26 with revenues, with fiscal year revenues estimated revenues in that number. So if we look at the 70-30, we're saying again that 70% we're going to go ahead and finance, pay in cash 70%, and then we're going to finance 30%. So if we look at these numbers, the borrowing or the financing that we will be doing in this 70-30 example, we are going to be borrowing $14,250,000. Again, if we assume an interest rate cost of 3.33, we're saying that our payments on an annual basis, both principal and interest, is about $2.3 million. So after 7 years, we're making the assumption that the cost is going to be about $16.5 million. Again, looking at the 53066 number, this is our fiscal year 2025, including the remaining revenues that we have for the remaining of the year, including expenditures. If we take the 7.495 number, which is the callable bonds out, if we take the cash, the 70% cash that we're going to pay, we're saying that the resulting fund balance is $12,321,656. Again, this does not include the estimated revenues for 26. Let's assume too, and this is a discussion that we've been having during the 2x2s. Right now, our reserve number is $12 million, up to $12 million. One of the things that we're planning to propose in our fiscal year 26 is to move that reserve number for beach preservation fee to $20 million. So let's assume that $20 million is the reserve that you approve. So again, I will be talking later on about, I'm not going to compare the 20 with the 12 right now because again, we're missing revenues for 26. So if we move to the scenario number 2, is the 60-40. Again, in this case, we are financing $19 million. We're utilizing the same interest cost of 3.33%. And then the payments on this one are about $3 million if you look at year after year. So we're projecting that the cost for a 60-40 for 7 years would be about 21.9. again, the same thing as the one before. We have the 53 number balance. We take the callable bonds out. We use the cash, which is the 60%, which is the 28 and a half. Then that leaves a $17 million number. If we move to scenario 3, this one is the 50-50 option. So it's half and half. So we are financing, in this case, $23,750 million. Again, the payments here are a little bit higher than the 2 scenarios before. But one thing that you do need to take into consideration, right now, we pay in the bonds that we have right now in the town, we pay about $3.9 million. So this one is a little bit lower than what we're paying right now for our beach bonds. This one is 3.8. So that will leave us about, the cost for 7 years would be about 27.4. Again, using the same numbers as the scenarios before. We have a balance of 53. We take the callable bonds of 7.5. We take cash out of 23,750. That will leave us a 21,821 number. I will show that in another slide. This one is scenario number 4 that we added. And by the way, we added this slide. It wasn't in the original slides that we sent to you over a week ago. So you do not have this one. This one is brand new. Again, this one is utilizing 100% cash. We started with the same balance of 53. We took out the callable bonds. We used cash to pay 47 and a half. Then the resulting fund balance is a negative 1.9. Again, this is not including the revenues for 26. Before I go to this one, let me go to this one. This one is what I call a summary. This is brand new to the presentation as well. This is a slide that I just added. So again, this is comparing all the different scenarios that I just mentioned. So if we start with the first one, all cash, the fiscal year 25 year-end projected fund balance, again, is the 53 number that you saw previously for all the different scenarios. If we pay the callable bonds, that would be less than $7.5 million. If we pay in the first column is utilizing 100% cash, we pay 47 and a half. In the 70-30, we pay 33.250. 60-40, we pay 28 and a half. And the 50-50, we pay 23 and a half. As you can see, the fund balances without projected fiscal 26 revenues are the same numbers that you saw in the previous table. Now let's talk about things that are revenues or potential revenues to us. So as you know, and we've been talking about this for a while, that we have some potential FEMA money that we can potentially get for past storms that we had on the island. So we are projecting a $7 million FEMA number. I do want to make you aware that this is the amount that was approved by FEMA. It doesn't mean that it's the amount that we are going to receive from FEMA, because it depends. Our job is to submit to them our expenses, our receipts, and it's their decision to make. Do they accept that expense? Yes or no? So we want to believe that we will get the full $7 million, but it's not a guarantee yet. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. You want to add something on that? Okay. As it relates to the fiscal year 26 revenues, this is the amount that, if in the 2x2s that we had this week, the estimated revenue that we are expecting for beach preservation fee for 2016 is $13,625,537. And this is the same revenue amount for all the scenarios we have. Again, another component to this is non-beach renourishment CIP projects that we will be proposing in May for your approval. These are projects that also are paid out of the beach preservation fee. So that amount is about $1.3 million. So we remove that amount, and then the estimated ending fiscal year 26 fund balance that we have for all cash is $17 million. For 70-30 is 31.6. For 60-40 is 36.4. And for 50-50 is about $41 million. Okay, so these are the estimated balances. Now let's think about the reserves that we discussed before that we would like to get approved by you, council members. If we increase our policy reserve from 12 to 20, if I'm looking at that 20 and I'm comparing that against the estimated ending balance of fiscal year 26, it looks like we will be short. We won't be able to have a reserve of 20 if we do all cash. If we do the 70-30 and we do the same comparison, if I'm looking at 31 versus 20, it seems like with the 70-20, with the 70-30 option, we have enough money to reserve. I mean, we will have about $11.6 million left. If we do the 60-40, we will have a little bit more. So 36 versus 20, we will have about $60 million left. If we do the 50-50, we will have about $21 million left once we do the reserve. So that's the summary as it relates to all the different scenarios. Now let me go back one page, the one that I skipped. One of the things that I want you to be aware is there's something called a coverage ratio, and the way it's calculated is pledged revenue divided by debt service payments. A higher debt service coverage ratio indicates a stronger ability for the town to cover debt payments using operating cash flow. And as you can see, all the different scenarios, we are actually and I mentioned this before, we're very privileged as a town to be able to have the coverage ratio that we have regardless of the scenarios. So that means we have enough money to pay for our debt. And that's what this represents, this slide here. So I want you to be aware of our coverage ratio. Regardless of the option, it is very high. This here is very busy, and I apologize for how busy this is. This actually is something that we will be presenting to you during our CIP presentation. So what we normally do in finance every year, we look at all the funds that we can use to pay for our CIP projects. So that's what this chart is. And in here, I'm giving you based on where we are, and this number is a little off because we have made some changes to our CIP spreadsheet since last time we created this. But just to give you a general idea, we're projecting projects to be about $77 million, and again, this number is subject to change. But if I'm looking at all the projects that we have all together, and I'm looking at all the different funds, the fiscal year 26 projected ending balance, those are the balances that we're projecting to have at the end, once all these projects are paid for. This is the ending balance. So if I'm looking at the beach fee, the only thing that 10.4 number doesn't have is a $7 million FEMA number. That's why that 10 versus the 17 that I showed you before is not the same. But I just wanted to highlight this, that we're not only paying cash regardless of the scenario that you pick, we're also paying cash for other projects that are not beach renourishment projects. And right now, based on the numbers that we have, we're talking about $31 million in cash that we will be using to pay for other projects that are not beach related. So I just wanted to make you aware, we kept talking about beach renourishment, and that's not the only project that we're funding with cash. So this is only for illustration purposes, so you are aware that we're utilizing cash somewhere else as well, other than beach. And that's the end of this presentation. Again, we need your direction, council members. And any questions that you may have, I have our professionals here ready to answer any bond financing related questions that you may have. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. So I'll open up to council members first for questions. Bryson?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for all the detailed financial information. And the new chart, which is page 9, which includes the projected FY 2026 revenues. Just in looking at that chart and at the difference that you went through down at the bottom with the estimated fund balances minus the fund balance policy, and so taking 70/30, it's 11.6 million that we would have in addition to the new fund balance proposed of 20 million. So if we're looking to try to increase funds from the beach preservation fee over the next 7 years to be able to fund the next beach renourishment, it would seem as though we would want to have a large number of those revenues to gather in addition to the minimum reserve balance. So we need 20 million plus 7 years times that to be able to fund the next beach renourishment. So that's what I'm looking for is a way to do this, that we can continue to put away money to fund the next beach renourishment. So I think I understand it that way. Then I do have a question on page 10, the last one, which includes what is currently projected for our CIP projects. And as I understand it, the current estimate is around 77 million for CIP projects, and then you take out the 47.5 million for beach renourishment. So that's about 30 million in CIP projects. So I think it's important to remember that number. The one detailed question I have on this page is about the state ATAX column. And that is, when you look at the FY 25 projected ending balance, it's negative 9.9 million. So, and I don't know whether that's reflective of the timing of when we get state ATAX money and when we expend that money. But when you look on down at the very bottom, after we have the capital projects, there's still a negative balance at the end of FY 26. So my question is, what's causing those negative balances in that state ATAX chart?
So one thing to know is when we get the income for the state aid tax, the way we get it is on a calendar basis. The way we account for it is on a fiscal basis. So that's one. The other one is in relation to, and one thing that we are planning to bring in front of council is our policy in relation to allocation of aid tax. And a decision that has to be made is, how do we utilize aid tax money? Do we utilize aid tax money not only as a combination of CIP projects, combination of the aid tax money that potentially we allocate to the different offices and organizations that we have in. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. So we don't have the negatives that we have. Because right now, if we look at the numbers, and again, we're comparing apples to oranges as it relates. That's something that needs to be taken into consideration. Oh, there's something that we're not doing here, and it's potentially subsidize this. This is what we call the transfers in and out. But right now, I'm just showing you the bare bones without any transfers, without any reclasses of funds. So you have a picture of, if we don't do any of that, that would be the ending balance.
So basically, except for state aid tax, all of these, we can look at them and feel comfortable with fiscal year. But what we really need to do is to take the state aid tax funds out of here and look at it on a calendar year basis. And I'm hearing that on a calendar year basis, we're okay, it's not negative.
Yes, that is correct. Mm-hmm.
That always makes me feel better when our numbers are not in the negative. And about charts. No, that's the one that I asked about, and that is the new chart showing, FY '26 fund balance with projected revenues, showing that we can exceed fund balance and sock money away for the next beach week. That was accurate, so.
That is correct.
Those are my questions right now, Mayor. Other than, I haven't heard a staff recommendation yet as to which one to go, but I'll
Okay.
hold that question in advance till I hear other questions.
All right, great. Just for the purpose of the audience and those who are watching online, a couple things that we're trying to figure out here is that the next time that the beach renourishment comes around, that we at least have the funds in place that it cost us the last time to do it. Not saying necessarily that we're going to pay cash for it next time, but to have those funds readily available because we know it's going to be an ongoing expense, but really to shore up that account to make certain that funds are there, whether they're used to borrow or used to pay cash. I just want to make that clear for everybody as well. Ms. Tunner?
So I wanted to go through what the decisions are that we want to talk about and where I stand on those decisions.
Okay.
So the first one would be increasing the minimum for the beach renourishment fund balance. Currently, it's set at a maximum of $12 million, and your proposal in here is to set it at a minimum of $20 million. I am in agreement to do that. I think it's important that we have a strong reserving policy. It sets us up for success in case there's some type of weather-related incident in between our beach renourishment. It provides us safety in regards to that. And so I am comfortable with that. One of the things that you may want to consider is having some type of economic escalator included as well, so that, it reflects that $20 million today isn't $20 million 10 years from now. So something to consider there. So I'm very much aligned with that. And that is a key decision that needs to be made in order then to pick which option, you're going for. So wanted to let you know where I was on that. Number two, in regards to the structure of bonding, I like the fact that it's a 7-year bond and not a 10-year bond. 10-year bond was what was done last time with the thought process that we would be doing beach renourishments every 10 years. And we're seeing, at least our position now is that it's less than 10 years. So let's align our borrowing to the schedule of when we think we are going to need to renourish again. So I like the idea that it's a 7-year bond. I think that's smart. The next piece is in regards to what percentage of debt do we want to incur? And I just want to make it clear that my initial point of view was to pay all cash. And that's what I said at the last meeting. But that was before we had the conversation regarding what the appropriate minimum needed to be. And with the decision of moving from 12 to 20, that means that the all cash option does not work. So now I am leaning towards the 70-30 option. The reason for 70-30 is that it does provide exactly what it is that we require, in that it provides us funds to pay for the beach renourishment. It allows us to live into the $20 million, and there is some excess there for potential projects that we may need. In addition, one of the things that we need to think about is, to Councilman Bryson's point, we want to say, and Mayor Perry's point, we want to save money towards the next beach renourishment. And that means that 7-8 years from now, we need the $20 million, or the increased because of economic numbers, more than $20 million, plus the cost of the beach renourishment. And the way we're going to fund that is through our annual beach renourishment fees that we collect every year, less our maintenance costs, less our debt costs. So if we have more debt, we're gonna have to subtract more money out of what we collect every year as we try to fund 100% of the beach renourishment for the next time. So, in simple math, we collect about $13 million a year. Ariana has laid out $1.3 million in non-CIP funds, which I'm assuming is maintenance. And then if we rule out and remove $2 million for debt, that leaves about $10 million, in what I would call discretionary funds that you could be saving towards that goal of beach renourishment in the future years. So I think it meets all those tests. I think it's also important to recognize that when we borrow this money, we're borrowing the money against our beach renourishment fees. And that means that the money that we have in bonding should be going towards beach renourishment projects. So what that means is if we have extra money, that doesn't mean that that can go to parks and roadways or other types of projects. It needs to stay in that bucket. So again, I believe the 70-30 provides us all that we need for now and in the future. In regards to the payoff of the current bond of $7.5 million, Ariana mentioned that there isn't a big difference between the bond payment of 5% and what we could invest. We only have 2 years left of payments. So it's not that long. And if you think about it, what we would be doing is we taking that $7 million that we pay off in 2 years and now put it into a new fund, bond fund that we'd be paying off in 7 years. So we'd have 5 more years of, payment of interest. And when you look at the differences between what we're paying
I'm
now
sorry,
versus,
Melinda.
yes, but versus what we are investing, it's pretty close. So I would say that it's probably, you could do it, you could not do it. One of the things that I think we should consider, though, in regards to the payoff of that $7 million is the $7 million FEMA reimbursement. So that is a important piece in the equation. It's, it laid out there that we would be getting a $7 million FEMA payment. And that's what we know today, but, it's a changing world out there. And so it could be delayed, it could be removed. And so if we were concerned about our ability to collect that $7 million, we could offset that risk by not paying off the $7.5 million bond early, and we'd still be in the same financial picture that you see in page 9. So I know I said a lot.
That's good.
The last comment is in regards to the state aid tax, and, haven't had a chance to take a look at it, and I know we had our 2x2s, and one of the things that we didn't have time to go through was, and I'm interested in, is the allocation methodology of how we decide how we're going to fund, all of our projects. And to me, the question on that page is, it's not so much the revenues and when we get them, it's why we have allocated $27 million in expenditures to state aid tax. I don't know that we've spent that much for those types of CIP allocations in the past for state aid tax. So that's just a question that I have. We don't need to answer it today, but as we go through the budget process, that'll be something that I'll want to better understand.
Okay, thank you. Other comments from council? Mr. Desmond?
Just one quick one. Good reason why I have financial advisors, so bear with me. But, there's a philosophical answer all of us may have about this, but then I think there's an exact financial number and an answer to be given. And I'm really curious to hear not just what our staff has to say, but what our advisors have to say. And if it's different, why? And if it's the same, then it's obvious. Because just like I said in our first meeting, at some point, these lines intersect. And it's not exactly 70-30, 60-40, 50-50. It's a real number, and we're capable of making a real number, whatever that number is, 60-40, whatever it is. And so I think whatever's financially responsible and where the line crosses is where we need to land. And just for food for thought for the future, I think we, as a council, need to examine and look at measures to try to look forward to retain the sand that we have for a longer period of time. Probably know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, there's ways of doing that, and there's things that we need to explore with our engineering firm out of Jacksonville. Find out what the cost of those measures would be, and then line them up with what we spend on renourishment, and at some point, those lines intersect. So, it's a huge financial responsibility that the town has to retain the beach. I just think that there's possibilities that we can get a longer life out of what we have unless we have an intermediate storm, somewhere between 5 and 8 years. I'm looking forward to hearing your recommendations.
Right, Mr. Alfred.
Appreciate the comments of Mr. Turner. My view is somewhat different. I prefer to do a much larger borrowing. The largest one on this sheet is 50-50, so that's where I would come out. And the reasons for that are several. First, I think one of the primary considerations is the difference between the rate that we spend on borrowing and the rate we receive on our investments. And I think that is a primary consideration. And here the suggestion is we will do better on our own investments. That suggests borrowing. The second aspect is that I think it is more conservative to maintain a sizable cash reserve. One thing we know for sure is that the next time we do this, it's going to be a lot more expensive. We live in terms of weather, we live in very unpredictable times. It is not impossible that we have a hurricane in the next 7 years that wipes out much of the beach, and we have to do this again. That particular point, and that's not 7 years from now. And then what do we do? So I like having more cash around for a variety of reasons. One of the basic reasons that municipalities engage in borrowing to fund capital projects and other similar projects is who bears the impact of the effort. If we proceed to pay a substantial amount of cash, that means that people who used the beach in the past paid for it, not the people who are using the beach during the time that it's been renourished. So I think there's a very significant factor. Who pays for this? The people who are using the improvement or the people at some other point in time? So all that suggests to me is that we go for one other aspect is if we pay off outstanding bonds, in effect, we're using more cash. And in order to cut down on the use of cash, I would favor more borrowing. So I end up favoring the 50-50 proposal.
All right, thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too want to hear from staff and our financial advisors. Thank you all for being here. It's good to be in y'all's company. We're gonna look for that crystal ball on some stuff a little later. I know we're being asked two questions. One about the callable, and it seems as if staff is already recommending that we pay the callable, so I'm supportive of that, okay? And again, I want to hear more about your recommendation as far as the split is concerned. And I've got some comments around it. Before I get to those comments, I want to ask a couple questions of staff. One is, maybe Mr. Orlando can help with this. So the beach fee, the expenditures that we use that money for outside of beach renourishment, am I correct about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think Adriana's showing maybe a $30 million spend this year. I'm just curious of the trend, over the last few years, what has that spend been outside of beach renourishment? I don't know if we can give me sort of an estimate on that. I'm not gonna hold you to it. Just wondering, are we spending 30 million a year or does it fluctuate?
Where are you pointing at 30 million of beach preservation fee use? What line?
So I'm looking at all the CIP projects.
Right.
Not necessarily
Okay.
$30
It's not
million
beach,
for beach.
It's 30
It's all the
non-beach.
projects.
Yeah, I think some of that reference was $30 million in capital programming proposed, right? I'm not there yet. I still have a couple weeks before I present the first reading of a budget to you all and before we sit down and talk at workshop. The beach renourishment is a considerable size and portion, right, in part of our CIP, right? Our CIP is an additional $30 million for parks and roads and pathways and some other things. I think that was the reference. But over time, I've never understood, right? And in my 4 years of history here, I've always said this is my very first beach renourishment project, and us figuring out the past without Scott Liggett at the table has been a real lesson. I have, and the town has utilized beach preservation revenue for projects other than beach renourishment. Beach preservation doesn't, by the statute and by the ability to use the dollars, doesn't just mean beach renourishment. We have some dollars earmarked for Islanders Beach Park. We have it for maintenance when the boardwalks or the decks are in poor repair. It is a really good source of revenue, and I believe a really good expenditure to use beach preservation fees at those areas, because that's where it can be used. It can't be used anywhere else. Different than A-tax, right? A-tax is also probably a good source of revenue. SCA tax and or local, SC, as we look at our budget, we use a lot of SCA tax in the capital area for pathways. It's easy to use A-tax for pathways, a lot easier than beach preservation fees. So as we really look at the art and the science of our budget allocations and our fund allocations, beach preservation to us has meant try to right. Your primary, your priority is beach renourishment. Let's not go for broke and say all our dollars went to fixing a boardwalk or building a new beach park and parking. But we have used it. It's a long answer, but holistically, we aren't just saying beach preservation is to renourish. And that is a policy decision. It's a policy decision that was voted on in a past budget that allocated beach preservation revenue to capital projects outside of beach renourishment.
Okay, and I support that.
That help? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
May I add something else too? I think every time, and I don't know if it's just what I heard, but I think there's a misconception as it relates to beach preservation fee. It is not the same as beach renourishment. So we're talking, beach renourishment is another project that we have. So to extend to what Mark said, we use beach preservation fee not only for CIP projects, but also for operating expenses too. So I want to make sure that's clear.
Absolutely. Okay. So with that, and we will continue to have ongoing maintenance, operations. We have to. And we've already experienced a term reduction. We thought it would be every 10 years. Now we're back again in 7 years. And I don't know what it's going to be over the next 7-year term if we have to shorten once again. Okay. And Lord forbid we have a named somebody come through here and we have to do it in the interim, right? So with all that said, I am leaning more towards more of a borrow situation, as Alfred has articulated, just so that we position ourselves to deal with the other things that will come up along with beach renourishment.
Thank you. So I got a couple questions. With the state pool that we're generating revenue off of, at a rate of, 4.35%. What's the index that's run on, and what's historically the average that's been there? Do we have any idea on that?
It's a short-term investment fund, so it's driven by what the federal funds rate
Okay.
is, and so it's very much linked to movement in that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important to understand the indexes that are being utilized to generate those revenues, as we make a decision going forward, because it's not just a 4.35 number, it is based upon everything else that's going to happen. So thank you for that. And when it comes to the debt service coverage ratios, obviously having anything greater than a 2-time or 3-time is very powerful. But within the 3 that have been represented here, do any of them make any differences to the bonding agencies as to our strengths and our ratings?
So looking at the different coverage levels, and I'll just speak in general, and then we can look at, great, thanks, Adriana. I'll take Moody's, that's one of the 2 agencies that rates the town. Moody's looks at these types of bonds. They start with your general obligation bond rating, which is AAA, and then they will notch it down from there based on certain aspects of the fee in general, how broad-based is it, and then also the coverage level is another big driver. So, and your hospitality bonds that you have outstanding have very strong coverage, and they're actually rated on par with your GOs. They're AAA. Currently, these beach preservation fee bonds from 2017 are rated AA2. They have a little bit lower coverage, still very strong. Moody's, their rating criteria says if you're between 2 and 4 times coverage, then it should be rated 1 to 2 notches below the GO rating. If you're greater than 4 times, then it can be rated on par or within a notch. So looking at the different coverage levels, that scenario 3 is a little bit below 4 times. The other 2 are above 4 times. So based on that, they could say, well, scenario 3, the 50-50, it may be 1 notch lower. It may be a AA2, whereas you could get to a AA1 if you were 1 or 2. It's very close. Your follow-up question may be, what's the difference in the interest rate on that? And it would be anywhere from 5 to 10 basis points, which is 0.05% to 0.1%. So on a 7-year deal, a fairly negligible difference in the overall interest rate and the ensuing debt service costs, but yeah.
Yeah, and when it's, in terms of having the $7 million outstanding in the previous offering, 2 years left, and let me ask you this first. Are there 2 payments left, one before?
So there's 3
July.
payments left, 2 of them are callable.
Okay, all right, just want to make sure. So in the eyes of the rating agencies, and does that make any difference of having it outstanding versus having it paid off in terms of terms of our ratings?
So it would when we look at the coverage level, because if you keep those 2 maturities outstanding, which would be outstanding for your fiscal year 27 and 28,
right,
and we issue debt now, it's going to stack, I'm using my hand, it's going to stack on top of your existing debt, which is going to in turn lower your coverage. And so if you were to pay those bonds off, you've got a clean slate, and that's the coverage that's shown. That's assuming you pay those bonds off. If you didn't, you would have 2 years where your coverage is lower, and then it would get to that level.
So our bond ratings over the past, I'll just say 3 years, and I'm asking a question, have done what? Have they gone up, the ratings?
GO bond, general obligation bonds have stayed at AAA, and then your hospitality bonds and your beach preservation fee bonds have gone up because Moody's actually revised their criteria to take into account what I was describing. And so they've gone up because of how strong the coverage is.
Okay, thank you. Those are the real crux of making the decision on how we borrow and what's best for the economic side of our community. So, I don't know what the right answer is. I know that we've got to maintain our bond ratings and preferably over 4 times on the debt service coverage ratios. So as Mr. Desimone stated, there is a meeting of the curve where it makes the most sense, where your return on investment versus borrowing has that premium point. And if it's a 61, 39, 62, 38, 65, 35, 60, 40, 50, 50, where that lands, I don't know. That's y'all's job, right? But from my standpoint is, where is the best avenue for us to land that makes the most economic sense, that retains our bond ratings and our borrowing powers that we've worked so hard to garner? You don't want to use a high percentage of your available borrowing capacity, because then it starts to affect where you are. Being that we are fortunate to have cash and we've got great reserves, how do we put ourselves in that best position going forward? So, I'm hearing 70, 30, 50, 50. First of all, I'm hearing borrow, right? So, it's not cash. One thing that I am hearing that's a little concerning, is that I don't think we've done enough work on, is within that minimum threshold of $20 million, how do we break that down to the different projects, to the different responsibilities? Is it beach preservation that we're looking for, or is it the beach preservation fee? So I think we need to have an understanding as to what those dollars are there for, and really kind of address that policy side of it to make certain that we're addressing it correctly. So that I want to be certain of. Mark, do you have a question?
No, I just want to let you know, I hear you. We talked a little earlier, you all are talking, and I have also we have brought forward 12 to 20, but we have to make a decision. With the goal of next time having enough cash for the project, does that mean the fund balance is 47.5 plus 20, right? So we were talking earlier, I said we have to separate separate the fund balance expectation from a checking and a savings account, right? The savings has to be primarily and only beach renewal.
Right.
Comfortable with the additional that we have in there for an emergency other than beach renourishment. So I hear you.
Yeah, so that's a conversation we're going to have a little bit more in depth on. So, Ms. Bryson, if you let me just 1 second. So, based off of what I'm hearing, I'm in favor of paying off the debt. I don't think we're in a position that it causes any detriment to the financial standing of the town. As a matter of fact, I think it's a negative if we don't pay it off, especially if we're going to issue additional bonds. And I'm going to go back to, the guidance on the financing. I think there's a matrix that you have to run to really understand where it needs to be. But I think that a debt service coverage ratio of 4+ is what we need to be looking for to maintain everything. So, Ms. Bryson.
Mayor, I wanted to come back to where I'm landing now. I wanted to give folks opportunities to say, to ask other questions as well. So I'm good with the 20 million fund balance. I like the adding some sort of acceleration factor in there. Don't know what that's going to be, but somebody wiser than me can figure that part out. And then I'm in the 60-40 camp. And I'm in the go ahead and pay off the callable bonds, especially as you describe, as our financial advisors describe as stacking. That makes sense to me. I wondered where the numbers would come out. Sounds like the numbers are fairly even as far as payments go, but if it affects our bond rating, that's a different, thanks, Mayor, for asking those kind of questions. So that's where I am with that. I'm concerned about the FEMA payment, and so I think that does reduce the fund balance that we would have. I think we ought to just take that out and say we may not get that money. That's where I'd look at it. But the reason that I'm leaning towards 60-40 is I think the 50-50 doesn't get us there as far as the debt service coverage ratio. And also, when I think about it, the best way I can think about it is my home. So if I've got some savings and I'm stocking away, putting so much money, I call it a self-escrow account. We put so much money every month back into a savings account in case we need to replace the roof, in case we have 2 HVAC systems, in case we need to replace one of those. And so if I use my cash to buy that, then and let's say I use my cash to take care of replacing one of the HVAC systems. Next thing I know, the roof falls. And I've got to come up with funds for that. I want that cash available. And I think that that's a wiser way to go than paying more cash. And if you take that $7 million out, then it makes a big difference in what our ending fund reserve is. So I'm at 60-40 with the 20 million fund balance, paying off the callable bonds, And I can't remember, Melinda did a great job of setting out those questions, so maybe I've left one out.
Can I make one quick clarification?
Absolutely.
Your current beach preservation fee bonds are in that 2 to 4 times coverage range. So even under a 50-50, you would maintain your same credit rating that you have now. It's if you got over 4, you have some upside in that credit rating. So I wanted to make sure, even if you went the 50-50, we're not looking at going lower than where you are today.
Right, okay, thank you.
I don't know if this is a fair question, and I'm putting David and Andy on the spot here. But as financial advisors, every time we go, like Mr. Desimone mentioned, when we go to a financial advisor, it's for recommendations. So based on what you know, I know we've been working for a few weeks now, for a few months now. What is your recommendation for our town? Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah.
Add to that, the good question of where that line crosses of debt versus cash contribution scenario.
So I'll start and you chime in. So taking each of these in turn, like you did, which I thought you laid it out very well on starting with the fund balance. I think it's a great idea to move, and it sounds like there's consensus around that, move your minimum fund balance policy up. I do like the idea of an escalator because frankly, that's where you are today. You started at 12 million whenever it was. We're talking about 20 just because of inflation and costs are going up. So that's a very good idea to add on to that. In terms of paying off the debt versus leaving outstanding, I would pay it off. I'd recommend paying that off for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's, again, a consensus that you have cash to use. It's where best to use it. So I would start with paying off that debt for 2 reasons. One, the interest rate on it, the coupon is 5%. You're only earning 4%. It's unlikely that your earning rate's going to go higher. It may actually go a little bit lower, depending on what the Fed does. And so that's a better use of your cash to pay off higher costing debt. Even though it means you may need to borrow a little bit more, your current borrowing cost is going to be around 3.5%. So when I'm deploying cash, I would rather pay off higher costing debt. And then it also has the added benefit of clean slate with the new borrowing and the coverage. In terms of the new borrowing, and I know that's probably where there's the most kind of, not difference of opinion, because I think we're all talking about borrowing, it's just exactly how much. I think looking ahead and about how much, what I'll call net revenues, net cash you drop to the bottom line each year. It was a good question, Mr. Brown, you asked that about how much non-beach renourishment projects you have coming in. So if I was doing some kind of rough math on my sheet here, if you've got 13.5 million of total revenues and you know you're gonna spend, at least in fiscal 26, $1.3 million, I think was on that sheet for non-beach preservation projects, we'll have debt service somewhere around $3 million or so. You may be able to clear to drop to the bottom line $10 million a year. So if the goal is of the council to build up enough cash so that in 7 years, you've got enough cash there to pay pay cash for a new project, that's important to kind of take into consideration. All that said, I lean towards the 50-50 or the 60-40, a slightly higher tilt on the borrowing side. And that's partly just our nature, a little bit more conservative, just making sure you have more cash on hand. Because while we're looking at that $1.3 million of non-beach preservation projects, that's for fiscal 26. I don't have any insight as to yet what fiscal 27 or beyond brings in terms of some of those. So I would hate for y'all to be in a position where you've lowered your cash. It's still coming in, still healthy, but you've got some of these non-beach preservation fee projects that pop up that you want to use for that. So given that the coverage is really strong, whether it is 50-50 or 60-40, I would lean to the 50-50 just to give you a little bit more cushion to address some of these other projects. And then especially if y'all put an escalator on your minimum fund balance, then that minimum balance is going to grow. And then my last point is, in terms of having money on hand in 7 years for the next project, while it's 48.5 million today, if we add an escalator onto that, 3-4%, you fast forward 6 or 7 years, you're going to be into the $60 million range for another project of similar size and scope. So I think that's important to keep in mind is it's likely not going to be 48.5 million in 7 years. It's going to be something higher.
One thing I'd add is I know there was some discussion about paying the debt off or not, and you showed investment rates and short-term rates, they're going to fluctuate, no doubt about it. But, you're just in such a good spot, and you do need to view this revenue source as a restricted use. You've got to go for that. You can't use it for other things. And so to be able to get that clean slate, you guys appear to be kind of all on the same page about protecting yourself in the future, understanding. I grew up in a beach community, grew up in Isle of Palms during Hugo, okay? And what they went through and the cushion that you need to have to get out in front of FEMA reimbursements and then to do other things that make it better than it was before. I agree with David there, the 60, 40, 50, 50 range. And you're shortening the deal up to 7 years gives you a great interest rate in addition to the fact it's such a great rate. You've got, again, just the ability to have essentially the cheapest rates on the planet for a community your size with your balance sheet.
Steve?
So are those percentages that you recommend relative, in where if our bids come in 10 million higher or 10 million less, does that change your mind?
Yes, I think the total cost of the project would certainly play into it. And so if it's, I think we would want to refresh the scenario if it comes in dramatically or materially different than the 48. Yeah.
So what is material? You mentioned the word material. For me, as an accountant, that's a big word.
Yeah.
So what is material?
I would say if it's a greater than, if you're getting in bids plus or minus 10%, in terms of materiality, I know that's I just honestly just kind of picked that up, but I'm trying to think if that's $4 to $5 million either way, I don't think that dramatically changes this picture. But if we're starting to get, greater than 10% higher or lower, I think that's where we can update this and maybe that's a different answer.
So that brings the question of, if we start the process on borrowing X, at what point in time can we change that direction to change the amount?
Well, we'll have time to revisit, right?
Hopefully, yeah. But I'm just, if we start a process of borrowing, when do you say, what, we need to lower this or,
Our procurement, we're getting bids right now for our project. So the closing is April 17th, correct, Sean?
next week?
So, yes, that's next week.
That's right.
Then.
Quicker than I thought.
Then the team has to meet and make do the
Never
interviews
mind.
and make a determination at that point.
Never mind. I forgot it was next week.
So,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So we're going to know.
So I do have a question about where those lines meet, right? Because we know that we've got an interest rate right now of 4.35% on a return for investing. In between the three options, it's a $2 million swing in interest, right? From the 70-30 to the 50-50. What is, and I know we can't really project revenue off of an interest rate that's going to change at any moment, which they have been. But what do we expect the difference to be? I mean, we've got to have some kind of a forecast in there. If we're going to pay $4 million in interest, how much are we going to receive on the investments that we're putting in? Where is it going to be offset, right? So we've got a return coming in, but yeah, we're still paying out interest. So what is the net effect of that? Are we expecting, forecasting?
Right.
Put you on crystal ball.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a crystal
I
ball.
will tell you, the crystal ball is very.
In my other
murky at
life,
the
just so
moment.
you know, I'm a mortgage banker, so I get to
Yes,
ask the crystal
okay.
ball all the time. So I love asking the question.
I think we're changing your title now.
Yeah,
Current results are not reflective of future.
that's right.
They always have that disclaimer on the bottom.
And very much, I mean, it's been a volatile market throughout the calendar year, but particularly the last week or so, it's been, I mean, we've seen very dramatic swings in interest rates, higher and lower. So I think if I can kind of use some of the numbers here and I'll round, right now, that local government investment pool around 4.5%. Right now, you borrow around 3.5%. So that's where that would say debt is the more cost effective because I can earn more cash than I'm paying in interest. So where does that cross? If you look at, and I think the Federal Reserve is in a very tough spot because on the one hand, if you look at the tariffs coming on, that leads to inflation, higher costs. They've been guarding against and trying to get inflation in check for several years now. And so that piece of it would say, well, the Fed's going to keep their 4.5% rate at that level for longer. They're going to be hesitant to lower it. But what we've seen in the market here over the past week or so, with the implementation of tariffs, the market is expecting the Fed may start to cut its rate, lower its rate because of the recession concerns. And so it's a very tough, they're in a tough spot because you got recession concerns and you got the inflation concerns all driven by the same component.
And that's, you know, we're in a precarious position trying to decide upon a direction when there is so much, fluctuation. You know, so I'm kind of looking at it, okay, what if the interest rates marry each other at some point in time, right? 3.5, right? It's a net neutral, so to speak. Obviously, if it goes south of that and we're paying more in interest, then that's a problem. That's not where we want to be, but that's not the position that we're in. And everything I'm reading is that we're 68, 70% going to hit a recession. And I think it's, you know, a global recession by end of year, but I think we'll hit a country recession by the end of June. And you're right, where does the Fed decide to go? How do they address? So as we ponder all of this, we need to keep that in mind and, you know, help it guide us. But
No, sorry. I think the fact that, I'm not saying there would be a different answer, but if you were borrowing over 20 years or 25
Right,
years,
yeah.
I think this is where this comes up more. The fact that you're borrowing over 7 years and you're
Yeah.
able to pay this off pretty rapidly, that's going to mitigate any, you know, hindsight, we should have done this or that, because it's a relatively minimal amount of interest that you're paying over a 7-year period. So I think that's a big benefit to this structure. And it just shortens the time horizon. So I think that, I know that doesn't answer your question, but that mitigates to me anything of, oh, well, we should have done this or we should have done that. I think you'll find that it probably gets to about the same, you know, if we were to project rates to go down. So kind of right out of the gate, you're better off borrowing. Maybe in a couple of years, it goes a little bit low. Your investment rate goes below 3.5% if they do lower rates. But over the time, you know, full 7-year period, it's about a wash.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that when you look at the cost of borrowing versus the investment and the difference that you can make, that assumes that you don't spend that money.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right.
I think it would be helpful if we're gonna, as we go through the decision-making process, to answer one of the questions that was raised, and that's, what do we have planned for capital-related expenses that would come out of the beach preservation fee? I think that would be helpful, because yes, we do spend those funds, not just for beach renourishment, but for capital-related improvements. I know we've got islanders coming up that in the future, as well as our regular maintenance. But I think it would be good to lay that out. We have a plan that we are looking at for 5 years. So if we could lay out the specific ones that would hit that source of funds, I think that would be helpful.
Right now, we have Islanders Beach Park funded with some beach preservation fee. Forgive me for not having the whole CIP as we're planning it proposed, but that would fall in FY '27 just based on nourishment, around $5.5 million for Islanders. So plus what you see here. So, all right. Well, I would say to get ready for your budget. I don't know if you're ready for me to give some thought. I think Mr. DeSimone's asking for that line where they connect, and we're hearing that line at some point might be a wash. I do want to say, just for the room, there's a couple things that I'm thinking about. One, the difference between 70-30, right? 70-30 and 60-40 is a philosophical decision of town council. I'm happy to propose 60-40 and keep 36,357 and 31,60, or either one work. It's philosophical. We are the difference between 60-40 and 70-30, and I didn't hear you all talk 50-50, so I'm just looking at those two with all due respect to, but I said all. So I heard, it's a $4.7 million differential. And what's the difference, Adriana, between 70-30 and 50-50 in the total borrow then?
So we're talking $10 million difference between the two.
start getting into a lot more differential in Boro there. It's $4.7 million. So the process to think through all of this, we're following it. And I've always said, just even in my career and with all of you, trust the process, right? And so capital planning and budget preparations go hand in hand every year. I like that we're starting to ask questions about future year CIP, not just what are we building this year and why didn't we build it last year, capital programming questions. But when you prep the budget and capital planning, I just need to know where you're lining up here today. It might be 65-35 by the time we dig into it a little bit, but I have to plan the budget and align millage with debt. And so whether I'm using cash to cover or debt to cover, I have to align that millage in our debt fund within a couple weeks, first readings in May. So we are talking 60-40-30, 70-30, $4.7 million difference, 70-30 to 50-50 is closer to 10. We've got to plan the budget, which we're doing. We're going to plan for our capital projects, which we've said this is the highest priority, and I appreciate that. The next step that you would see in addition to budget, right, in addition to first reading, first Tuesday of May, and then the two workshops, May 12th and 13th, you would also authorize the bond, right, via ordinance. That's separate above and beyond the budget. So town council would authorize the ordinance, and that's two readings. And we'd know a lot more by then. We'd know the bids would be in. We'd know that if it was material or not, and the way I would define material is I'm thank you for saying that percentage, is anything that's going to dip in and start affecting our fund balance at that 20 million expectation. Once you pass the ordinance, then you start structuring the bond and issuing the bond. Those are, again, separate. And so there's still a lot more to learn and a lot more to figure out. And then after that, it's just debt management and repayment. So for us today, you know, we're talking about the difference between 10 and $4.7 million. And both work for me. I would just say this, respect the 60-40, 50-50. Both work as I look at this because I'm used to dealing with cash and not borrow and getting a lot done while we can afford it. But I do think that we have to be thinking, and I'm glad we're having the conversation, because you do have a 5-year capital improvement program priority list that we cannot fund with all cash. We cannot fund it with all cash. We cannot fund Dreesen and Islanders and Coligny and soccer and baseball and pickleball. We can't keep funding it with all cash. But I think that there's a desire and I think there's a need when we start looking at stormwater projects. So I'm happy to be, I'm elated to be a part of this conversation about where are we using our dollars. However, if we're isolating beach, 65-35 works, and anywhere between 70-30 and 60-40 work. We'll make both work. Neither of these affect our long-term health. And I would say in the room, if I felt that it was. It's a philosophy.
Yeah, I'm going to ask some questions in a minute, but before I do, did we have anybody sign up to speak?
No one signed up.
Okay. Does anybody want to speak since we have such a busy room?
Yeah, let's make sure.
All right, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions if I might. And it's not to say this is going to be the final answers right now, but it just kind of gives Mark and staff the direction on what we can agree upon. So when it comes to the current bonds at 7 million, you know, are we given the direction to pay those off now or just to hold on based off of what you've heard so far? You know, the head nods is kind of what I'm going for. Okay, so I think you've got that. Let's, you know what, getting those paid out, cleared up is the right way to go. There's no question from the community. There's no question from us where we are. That's cleared up, paid off, and at a higher interest rate. Increase in the reserves, and I love the economic escalator. I think that is a very, very valuable aspect to that. You know, I'm gathering that everybody is pretty much in favor of that as well. See, Desmond? Yeah, you had a question on your face. And then, the elephant in the room is, what's the percentage? And, I'll ask the question, Do we need to gather a little bit more information on the, the returns on the yield curves and how everything plays out based off of some different dollar amounts as to what makes the most sense? Because I'm not hearing that we have to make that decision today. I'm not hearing that we have to make it, but if I'm incorrect, tell me.
Let me say it, you have to make it today.
Okay.
Because I
So-
need to know what to put in the budget for an aligned millage.
Right, well, I was going
to
between the
support
50,
that.
the 50-50 and the 70-30, all right? where do we land? But I was hoping to have a little bit more direction from the staff on that as to what is the most beneficial.
Say, we have that
So,
recommendation.
All right?
so when I started this process, and this was a few months ago, I'm being very candid. I felt like 50-50 was the right answer when I started this. Then I started talking to and listening to all of you talk about how you felt about where we are and some of the things that you're planning to do, or we're planning to do here in the town. So my decision has changed from 50-50 to 60-40. Taking into consideration the many projects that we're doing, the many things that are taking place within our island. So the recommendation that I have today is 60-40.
Okay?
So, quick question. So is it logical to say that if we err, we could err more on the side of borrowing because we can always buy it down, right?
You can, and you can also err on the side of, because here's the extra factor, the price escalator above and beyond $20 million. That means just rough math, Sean and Mark math, $7 million a year above and beyond needs to be putting in fund balance. And so when you have your debt service above and beyond that, you're not going to be able to save the $7 million. And so when you factor all that in, forgive me, I don't have a spreadsheet and a line chart showing it. We have to be thinking of intentionally what we're trying to put in fund balance, not just what we're trying to borrow or not to borrow. So if you're trying to put $7 million a year in fund balance over 7 years, which I think is a major improvement, right? I think everything we're doing is a major improvement. Fund balance is going up, intentionally saving for beach different than ever. But when you're trying to save $7 million a year, you gotta be, you can't have so much debt. You can't do that.
But I think David brought a good point. We don't know at this point how much this project is going to cost. So we will be saying here 70-30, 60-40, 50-50. But until we know the real number, I think that's going to be a big decision making, and this might change. So right now, I know our financial advisors mentioned 50-50, and I mentioned 60-40. It is a hard decision, but it is also something that I think we're thinking long-term, more long-term now. We're thinking 5 years as it relates to CIP. We're thinking about, the storms that are happening, the different things that we're doing that we want to do on the island. So that should be part of the consideration that you need to keep in mind when you're selecting the right thing for us to do.
Brown?
Yeah, just listening to the conversation, Mr. Mayor. With the bids coming in very soon, first reading being before us, just after that, my perspective is the experts, the subject matter experts, our financial advisors and staff have heard from us, go get this done, and you need to borrow, protect yourself as far as the future is concerned. So at this point, Mr. Mayor, I'm prepared to say if it's somewhere between 60-40 and 50-50 that the staff and the financial advisors come back with for us to vote at our first reading in May, I'm comfortable with that. I think we have beat this thing to the point where they know where to go and bring us back something that makes sense. And I would not be opposing a budget in front of us if it was 62-38, because I'm bent on 50-50. So I'm ready to hand it over to them.
Awesome, thank you. Other comments? Bryson?
One quick comment, we don't have bond counsel here, but I know we've looked at the timing, based upon when we need to have the funds available and what kind of timing. Because once you decide on a number that's in your ordinance, in your advertisement, and so you can't change it, as I recall. So any idea about, I heard you say, Mr. Orlando, that today, because of the budget, and so I'm thinking today would be also the answer based on, the bond ordinance process.
So we have 15 days before we have to put our notice publicly. But you probably know this better than me, Mark, as it relates. Once we put it out there, can we change it? I don't know the answer to that.
Backwards a little bit easier than forwards in terms of material change or not. I think Ms. Bryson was asking me about the schedule for bonding. I'll get that to you. It's not completely 100% in alignment with the budget because I need you to adopt the budget before I have the confidence to float that bond. And so, but it is soon thereafter, and it's 2 readings of town council and then to bond market. I will talk with Franny because there are some variables. When I show up with first reading, I may not know what the bond markets are telling me. So what I might ask you for is a resolution that gives me the confidence to bid and then bring you back the results, or you can tell me, I trust you, through that resolution, go bid, and as long as it comes back within these center line, within these 2 lines, bond it. So again, I think that's some conversation I need to have with town council, but it's a non-issue. It's just a matter of timing post-budget adoption, which is June 3rd. I would imagine this is happening for us in July and August. We have dollars already in place, right? So in the budget, we have to place the revenue in there because we have to go under contract. I do think it's very important we remind everybody the reason, and there's no fault, it's just timing. We are renourishing this beach sooner than expected, sooner than anticipated, and we're competing with a deadline. And the deadline is the FEMA grant agreement and the reimbursement. And while that grant agreement and reimbursement's in place, we weren't able to come forward with all of this confidently, let alone bid up $47.5 million. Well, if anyone's listening, a $32 million beach renourishment project, which is some of our disconnect with our bids. But we couldn't bid it without the permit in hand. And we worked for a long time and worked hard to have the permit in place that was appropriate for the beach and the preservation and the environment, and also for the residents and the users of the beach. So that took time, but we are now up against the shot clock above the backboard for FEMA. Otherwise, we wouldn't be trying to get all this done in alignment right this second. So it's important that we understand that none of this is isolated. It's not just a financial decision.
Okay. So on a direction for staff, is anybody changing where they were at from a 50-50, 60-40, 70-30 based off of the conversation that we've had?
I'm not changing.
I already had you written down.
I've already thought it through with a lot of detail.
Sure.
And for clarity, 70-30.
70-30.
Right.
And I am comfortable. I was, wishy-washy is a terrible word. On the payment off of the bond, I could go either way with that. But your comment about the stacking and the impact on the rating, and I didn't really have a strong feeling one way or another. I think that makes sense to pay it off.
Thank you. Are you still 60-40?
40.
Steve, if you had to do a percentage, where would you land?
That's fine.
Yep, okay. So, I've been taking notes, and Mr. Alfred, you're still 50-50. This is how I look at it for whatever it's worth. Coming in with a debt coverage ratio currently where we are almost, I think it's an opportunity to improve that, right? So I look at that 4.45 and I like that. I like being a little bit more conservative and protecting that borrowing power. And then, we're looking at interest cost of 2.8, 3.8, 4.8, right? So kind of just, going to the gap there and at a 60-40 at a 3.8 number, you know, it's close to everything else we're talking to, and I think it's really minor in overall scheme. And the fact that we're tying it to 7 years, the life of the project, I think is the best way to do it. So, you know, Mr. Brown was a 60-40 to 50-50, somewhere in between. So what I'm hearing is that basically the direction is pretty much a 60-40 look at borrowing.
We will adjust the budgets accordingly.
Okay,
Thank you.
awesome.
I heard 60-40-ish.
Yeah, that's exactly,
It's
right?
a-
And
okay.
that's, I hope y'all take away that it may not be an exact point, because there is gonna be an inflection point where one makes more sense over the other. And that's what I think we all wanna see, you know, to help make that best decision. Okay?
Thank
Any
you.
other comments, questions? So, go ahead,
This is
Steve.
just a staff question, kind of related, but related. So when the bids come in, and assuming, which I'm sure all the bidders are qualified, that you'll take the low bid, most likely, and you will evaluate that bid. Who does that?
We will do it. Also, our beach consultant will be involved in helping us evaluate the bid.
Who will?
Our beach consultant, Chris Creed, with both.
Then who takes that contractor and for all the bidders listening right now, negotiates the real price?
IFB. So price will be the price with the low bid.
Even after the evaluation?
When it's an IFB, we have certain restrictions that are placed on us by the state as far as what we can and can't do once that bid is received. There's certainly things that we can ask during the bid process, but if it's determined to be a valid price and a valid bid, then there are state limits as to what we can and cannot accept.
Fortunate.
Explain what's unfortunate, just so everybody's understanding what you're saying. Okay.
Microphone.
Put your mic on. Oh, all right.
So, I just want to say this, just for everybody that's here, and of course, anybody that's going to watch this now or later. We are the only municipality in the state of South Carolina, and others as well, that have the ability to pay cash, that do not need to go to the county, do not need to go to the state, and do not need to go to the federal funding sources to pay for our beach renourishment. That allows us great flexibility in what we can do, and it's important for that to be said, because Hilton Head Island pays for its beach renourishments. Not Beaufort County, not the state of South Carolina, not the federal government. We pay for our beaches, and we maintain our beaches. So I want it to be clear that that our guests that are here, that spend nights in our rooms, are the ones that are paying for this. And it is our economic driver that makes certain that we are able to afford a lot that we're talking about doing within our CIP. And I can't stress it enough that we're so fortunate to have previous councils to have put this into place as a protection aspect for our community. And trying to address it going forward, making certain that it is more than substantial and that we've got it covered for resiliency and everything else is very important. I just want to make those points. So with that being said, Kim, has anybody signed up to speak on non-agenda items?
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. Any last comments by anybody? Mr. Orlando?
If I could just paraphrase what we're going to do moving forward.
Yes.
I think that just helps the room. One, first and foremost, you made a point. Yeah, Mr. Riley and the team putting this revenue source in place has been a gift. And so I think that we're actually making some good decisions about our future, from changing 12 to 20 and escalating that over time. So I'm proud of internally, but very grateful for those folks that were here before our time. Sorry, I flipped the page over. So going to bring you a budget forward in the coming weeks, right? So the budget is presented to the public the first Tuesday of May. I have to post a public hearing notice on that a couple weeks, 15 days ahead of time, so probably 16, 17 days ahead of time. We'll propose a budget that will be public. And that's just how the public hearing part of it works. Before I even present the full budget, you will see a public hearing notice that includes the various funds, the millage, and all of those factors. So I will factor all of this in there, and that's to Adriana's point earlier. Well, the budget's not till May 3rd. We have to make this decision right now because I have to post public hearing. So with that being said, we will pay off the callable bonds in the budget, right? So this the budget prep part of this, pay off the callable bonds, a funding scenario over 7 years, not 10, which I think is a drastic improvement. We have to determine that cash versus debt percentage. Frankly, when I'm walking in the room today, I'm leaning closer to 70-30. But I'm hearing you all say 50-50, 60-40, and all very, very good reasons for our future. And I'm also considering the FEMA grant agreement. Well, it's not a grant, it's a reimbursement agreement we have with them. It's different. It's still not guaranteed. So when I factor all that in, and there's some great points today, you will also see a budget with a beach preservation fund balance going from 12 to 20 at a minimum right now, but with some stated goals for the future annually to escalate that. You'll also see some fund balances on other funds. And to your point earlier, we're going to start looking at retaining sand and not just pumping it back. I think that is very important. You know, in addition to dollars in other areas, they don't have sand, right? And so we are so fortunate. Sand is gold is something I learned, Jeff. Isn't that when you were with your people? I learned sand is gold at that. But I'm also going to bring you something back that shows a debt service coverage of 4+. And then also with that, I will have a schedule proceeding with the bond. We need to spend a little bit of time planning that agenda, right, with Franny Heiser included. And it can include a resolution to kick it off, or we could go straight to first reading and then bid for the bond, float the bond. So some good, just great. I'm very excited. The fact that we're trying to decide over 4.7 million or 10 when the cash is there. The FEMA, of all things in the room, two things for me are risk. Not knowing the price of this yet, and that's on the 17th, and it's after the public hearing goes out. And then separately, the FEMA reimbursement. So that's where my mind's at. The permit used to be a big concern. It was keeping us up late, but we have that, and so that's great. All right, and I appreciate your time, and great job by Adriana, our team, and appreciate all of the town council members' input and feedback very much.
Yeah, thank you all for your input today and conversation. We are adjourned.
Thank you.